Hello, this is Property Matters, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every Sunday from 10 a.m. on YouTube, Facebook, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on our website, we'd love you to hit the Google review button and leave us a nice short review. Please get involved by adding your comments in the comments section. And if you'd like to email, the address is hello@propertymatters.co.uk. Property Matters is also available as a podcast on our website and via the biggest podcast platforms, which is available every Monday at 10 a.m. So let's take a look at this week's property news. Here's Joe Joshi. Morning, Joe.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everybody. And those to our listeners and as well as our viewers. A nice frosty yet foggy morning. Chills are definitely there, but there are chills in the air, even within the property market.
Yeah, it's an interesting story from Andrew Bailey in the news this week, Joe. Bank of England Governor, of course, Andrew Bailey, has hinted that base rates may not go higher than 4.5%, which would be good news for many prospective mortgage applicants and also those who already have a mortgage, of course, after the markets fell back in line with the bank's own outlook. So what he's saying is, in the wake of former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's disastrous mini-budget, Mr Bailey said that the market's priced in a UK risk premium. And that has now receded following the appointment of Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor and Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. And he says, we don't target a particular peak, but what I will say is that back in November, and quite unusually for us, we thought the market curve and therefore the market's view of what they thought we would do was out of line with our own thinking. The reason was, quite frankly, there was still something of which I would call a UK risk premium in there following the events of September and October. At the time, the markets reeled off the back of Kwarteng's shock policy plans to take an axe to taxes. He says if you go back to the height of that period, the peak of what the market thought they were going to get was over 6%. By the time we did our forecast in November, it was 5.2, and now we're saying it's going to be 4.5%. So there is a possibility here, Joe, it could fall to even lower. And we do have, of course, a meeting, don't we, at the beginning of February, where they're suggesting another 0.5%, which would take it to 4%. So we're getting near to what they think is going to be the peak now.
Yes, it's interesting. He's actually given some sort of a target, but I have to be honest with you that I think that we're probably going to get a little bit even north of that as time goes on if things don't start to shape up. I've always had it in my mind that the figure that the bank will probably settle at ultimately is probably about 5%, but it would be fantastic news for all of us if it was lesser than 4.5%. And even, to be honest with you, if we didn't even get the 4%, it would be fantastic, because already people are paying way too much comparison to what they were used to. And it is the word used to that you have to be bearing in mind, because we had pretty cheap money, with sort of 0.25% and so forth from 2007, 2008 financial crashes to now. And had it not been to that wonderful duo that I wouldn't say Batman and Robin, but in this case it's probably Batman and Batwoman or something. But anyway, between the two of them, they've done a fantastic job of buggering things up for everyone that is even just an ordinary layman person that probably didn't even realize how much damage these people have come and done in 30 days. And the reality of it is we're now paying for it big time. And so with the interest rates at 3.5, likely potentially in the next 10 days or so to go to 4%. And as Andrew Bailey says, likely to go even higher. The mortgages that have been fixed obviously would be okay with that for a while, but as soon as their fixed rates are over, the new rates are going to be astronomical, and it's an adjustment. I think the biggest problem we've had, all of us have had, is the double whammy out of this. I mean, if it was just the mortgage rate, I think we kind of probably had it in our minds that it will be okay to go to a certain level, because what comes down is naturally going to go up and vice versa. But the reality here is that we had the utilities, the cost of living, all of those other bits that came charging in all at the same time, has really knocked the markets for six. But we're in property, and property is the safest form of investment people will make. They want their own home. It's never going to change. It hasn't changed in all the time that I've been in the business. and it's likely not to change going forward and past beyond my time, because it is the safest way that people feel that they've got their own roof over their head, and they will go to whatever levels and however tight the budget's going to be to try and make sure that they can ultimately own their own property.
Must be the first time in history, Joe, that the Chancellor has been of the Bank of England, rather the Governor of Bank of England, is actually more optimistic than Joe Joshi is. That's a first. He did say that the market expectations are no longer out of line, but he did refuse to endorse a base rate peaking at 4.5%, but hinted that the Monetary Policy Committee no longer felt expectations were out of line. Inflation figures published earlier this last week showed that prices slowed in December, bringing consumer price inflation down for the second month to 10.5%. He called it, get this, the beginning of a sign that the corner has been turned. So he disagrees with you, Joe.
Well, some of it he's got to play to the market. He's got to be cautious. He's got to work in hand with the government in situ, and of course keep the people right. I'm just saying that, in my opinion, and there he has hinted. You just stated that it could be higher than 4.5%. So it's all hidden in the small print of the words and how he wants to say it. But I'm just saying it as it is, and that is that I think that we're going to get a bit higher than what we think we're going to get, and not be too surprised about it. And I think we would have just lived through majority of that. Most people would have lived through majority of that had it not been for the double whammy. It's the double whammy that we've actually not allowed for, didn't actually see it coming to some extent. And of course, they are going to blame that on the war on Ukraine and all the other bits and pieces. But what really annoys me about these situations is that why is it that somebody else is pulling our strings? Why is it Putin is pulling our strings? We came out of the EU not to have our strings pulled, and yet we got another chap, somewhere else who's now pulling your strings about gas and oil and all sorts of other scenarios. And yet, here we are, part of the massive Commonwealth, and we could have done lots of other things, but we haven't done so. So successive governments, I'm not saying who, where, and when, but all of them are at fault at not actually making sure that we were completely self-sufficient and not having to rely on these other countries, waiting for them to turn around and say, well, actually, now your gas prices are going up, your oil prices are going up, and we're determined by them, when we actually have things like offshore, wind turbines, and we have the North Sea oil, we have all of those other things that we could have probably had enough surplus for us not to be able to have to be reliant on these people. Now, somebody probably think, oh, well, he's talking out of his rear over this, but it's just the basics, isn't it? The basics are about your house in order. And if you haven't got your house in order, it's not going to happen. So I think Andrew Bailey is just being cautious in his words, but the reality of it is, I think that we may be surprised. Now, if the gas prices and all these other prices starts to come down, which again, you're gonna say you're not optimistic. I'm not. They're not going to come down. It's they've been waiting to go up for hundreds of years almost, and they're not going to be coming down. So again, it's something that we're just going to have to accept and try and work out going forward.
Well, again, he's out of kilter with the Joshi philosophy, because he says that basically he expects inflation to fall quite rapidly from late spring, and this has a lot to do with energy pricing. He says that we've been locked in a level of energy pricing that's unsustainable over the winter, but in the last couple of months, electricity and gas prices have started to come off quite a lot since the beginning of winter. This isn't feeding through because of the way in which particular domestic prices are calculated, but it will do, and that's encouraging. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the government have said that the subsidy they're giving to all the households in the UK will no longer go from late spring, pretty much, isn't it? So they're suggesting that it will come down quite quickly from the spring. But if it's just the subsidy that is the reduction, you're still paying the same amount as you would be with the reduction, aren't you?
Yes, and I mean, okay, the subsidies might come down on one side, Paul, but there is a barrage of people standing outside, freezing their, bits off at this moment in time, striking. And so someone's got to pay for that somewhere along the line, haven't they? You've got your doctors, your nurses, your ambulance drivers, your train strikers. I mean, anyone that is out there with a pair of legs is striking at this precise moment in time. So they might turn around today and say to you that the inflation is going to go down because of the subsidies coming away and the gas and electric prices, but then they're going to go back up because someone somewhere has got to pay for these other people that are standing outside striking and creating problems for the other industries. So I just don't see. I mean, I'd love to be as optimistic as the governor of Bank of England and all these people, but right now, I first half of this year is going to be a bit of a bloodbath in terms of cost of living, inflation, and where we are. However, I'm in property, and we discuss property. Property program is what this is about, and all I'm going to say is that, as we said in the previous program, in the last, was it 40 years, 5 times, or was it 3 times that the prices have gone backwards. So all I'm going to say is that, forget about the government, forget about gas and electric, invest in property, because, look at the percentage. 3 or 4 times it went backwards or stopped in reverse, and out of 40 years. We don't have that sort of uncertainty. We're stable in property, and I think that's the key message that I would give, is that you can't go wrong. You still got to invest in your home and in your property.
He does say it means there's more optimism now that we're going to sort of get through the next year with an easier path. That's exactly what he said, which not words you'd normally associate with the governor of the Bank of England. I mean, for those watching and listening, I wonder what their views are. What do you think the rate's going to peak at? Pop it in the chat below, and let's see if we all agree. But Joe thinks it's going to go higher, maybe even 5%. The Bank of England, well, he's refusing to rule out a peak at 4.5%, but his language is much more positive than I would have expected. So interesting to see what people think. We're going to move on here, because it's a variation on a theme here, Joe, because this is a piece by Patrick Bamford, who's the head of international business development at Qualis Credit Risk, and he's basically saying that this speculation that with falling house prices, that's going to be a good idea, or rather good news for first-time buyers. But he's saying, well, hang on a minute. The point of the matter is that the mortgage rates are so much higher now that actually, even though the falling prices the prices are coming down, because the mortgages are so much more expensive, it's even harder to get on the ladder as a first-time buyer. And he's got a point, hasn't he?
Yeah, look, all of those challenges for the first-time buyers are really high and tough. And the only way that is going to happen at this precise moment in time is if, A, the government can continue to extend the Help to Buy scheme, which is still encouraging. It helped the market a lot. It comes to an end, I think, pretty shortly, if it's not already come to an end. And so that is something that would help first-time buyers. It would certainly help the housing market. And of course, it will encourage them with the right rates and so forth, and fixing rates. I mean, that's what you've got to really look at overall, about what is available to the first time. Without the first time buyers, Paul, the problem is the system in the country doesn't actually tick off. It changed some, I don't know, 30 odd years ago, a little bit, because the investors came into the buy to let scheme. Prior to that, and those that are listening, someone like Guy will probably remember that people used to buy a second home and another member of the family, and then another one and another one, another one. You couldn't actually, go and buy 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 properties in your own name or in a limited company at the time. They had to be bought in other people, because that was the only mortgage available, was just your first time buyers. And the buy-to-let market came in. And when the buy-to-let market came in, it actually put all of these people in, and started to say to them that, you've got a chance to now buy a portfolio of properties which you can rent out. And because of that, it pushed the first time buyers out a little bit, and didn't give them the choice. They weren't the only people to let people came in as well, and that was the change, and that still exists at this moment in time. You left me.
No. I'm still here. I was just looking up, because one of the things you were talking about, the Help to Buy scheme, which does come to an end this year, but there is other schemes coming out, and one of them is called Deposit Unlock. And I was just looking it up. It's the opportunity for a first-time buyer or an existing homeowner who could buy selected new homes with just a 5% deposit, if only I could say it. The scheme is devised in collaboration with lenders and the house building industry, enables first-time buyers and existing homeowners to buy with a 5% deposit, provides customers with competitively priced mortgage products up to $750,000, and makes buying a new home more affordable. The scheme is exclusively available to new builds, this is off of Barratt's website, and you can apply for a deposit unlock. So it looks like the industry is coming up with its own ideas rather than necessarily a government scheme. But essentially, it's a way to buy a property for 95% mortgage.
Yeah, I mean, there used to be a time when gifted deposits used to be a thing. So developers, it's the same thing of deposit unlock, gifted deposit, so forth. It's one of the same thing, different words really. But fundamentally, a developer would turn around and say to them that, if you buy this at £100,000, what we'll do is we'll gift you 5%. So they'll gift you 5% back. It's like a cash back. So this person will go out and get a mortgage of the 95%, and on completion, the developer would give them the 5% back as the cash back towards the deposit of that. All of those schemes, look, they get creative when they want to shift the market going forward, and that's what's going to happen now. But if we're going to sustain the market and we're going to get out there and start to sell to the first-time buyers and get all of those things moving, then quite honestly, they're going to have to get creative. They're going to have to come back with like a help to buy or a gifted deposit or a developer's deposit, or whatever they want to call it, as it goes. But unless that happens, and also the lenders have got to come back to the table and look at 5%. There was a time when we had 100% mortgages, and it may be that we got to go back to 100% mortgage in some areas, some first-time buyer operatives, where they turn around and say, look at that. And the Help to Buy scheme, Paul, the Help to Buy scheme is not as simple as it is. Actually, the buyer still has to pay 5%. In the Help to Buy scheme, the developer, shares 10%, and the government shares. So theoretically, they calculate 25% as a deposit, and then you can go and borrow 75% of that value. But later on, within the 5 years, 10 years, or whenever it is you decide that you're going to sell up, you're going to have to pay back that share, plus whatever growth in the capital that would be, in order for you to get on the ladder. So sometimes it pays to have a Help to Buy type of operation, because at least it gets you on the first run on the property ladder. And other times, if you're bought in an area there's amazing growth, then everybody wins, don't they? Because the developer's going to get his cash back, and he's going to get a profit on the uplift of the capital return.
And that's a good point, actually, isn't it? Because it's all very well looking at the entry requirements of something like Help to Buy, but actually you need to also look at the exit requirements, because that may actually not work out very well for you. The Intermediary Mortgage Lenders Association, which is not a particularly catchy name, points out in their new normal report that the very low interest rates available over the past few years have more than outweighed house price increases, meaning buyers have still been able to afford the larger mortgage required to purchase them. So what's interesting is that what he's saying is that when mortgage rates are really low, to some extent, it doesn't matter how much the price increases, because even at 10% a year, you'll still be able to afford it, because you've got the flexibility to do it. But when mortgage rates are high, obviously those increases become even more expensive. And so therefore, it actually, to try and keep up with the market is much harder when rates are higher.
That's right. I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at these mortgage rates that have been brought down, and then you have the stamp duty holidays, and you have the Help to Buy, all of these schemes have actually turned around and given people an incentive to get out there and go on. They know, the government knows, the lenders know that they need those people to come in and buy, because that's how the lender's going to make their money, and that's how the government's going to move their property structure, and know that other businesses that are related to the property market will actually do well when property does well. We know that from the time that, if you look back at the pandemic, just a couple of years ago, the only market that was doing well was the property market, and primarily because all the offshoots of the property market was keeping the country afloat to a large extent. The builders, the DIY stores, all those things, because when people are at home, and they could wear their masks and wander around the shops, or keep their distance and go in the queues. When you look back at all of those shenanigans that we went through in order to, but the property market per se was the only one that, had that continuation. And the reason for it was that they wanted to continue to keep building their way out. That's what they did. They built themselves out and kept one aspect of the industry going, and they kept that going by keeping all the other aspects of that industry. Your painters, your decorators, your carpet layers, all those people that are related to the housing market started to continue to make things happen. So when these analyses are done, they are done on the basis. But if you actually listen to what he's saying, in my mind, it's kind of obvious. Yes, when interest rates were low, houses were going up, house prices went up. Now the interest rates are high, they're going to slow down. It's not rocket science by anyone's comparison. But I still think that obviously, you'll never take people away from wanting to invest in property or buying their home.
No, he also makes another very interesting point. He says, because, and we've talked about the affordability for landlords and that loads of them are chucking the towel in this coming year. And he's saying many experts are suggesting that buy-to-let landlords, particularly those with only one or two properties, will find the ability to maintain their properties severely pressured in 2023, and that many may choose to sell, increasing the supply of properties for potential homeowners. But, he says, do first-time buyers want to buy ex-private rental stock? And if supply is taken out of the PRS, this is only likely to see rents rise further as tenant demand remains very strong. This could mean potential buyers see more of the income go towards rent, when at the same time they're still trying to meet the substantial deposit levels required to get on the ladder. It's interesting, isn't it, that we see a lot of new first-time buyers looking to the new build market because it comes with so many other additional benefits and is maintenance free.
Well, yes, the new market for the new millennials, as we would call them, is far more attractive because they don't particularly want to, other than the four walls to a large extent, where they can paint and decorate. But there comes a time with everybody, and I can actually speak from experience on this, that then becomes no more acceptable. And then the older properties that this chap is saying that people are going to be surplus to are the ones that come into play. And the reason why they come into play, Paul, is that they offer flexibility. They offer often things like gardens, which probably you're not going to get with a new property. And if you have a young family, you want, even if it's only a postage size stamp garden for your little ones to wander around outside, or sit with a deck chair and put your suntan lotion on when the rare sun comes out. But the fact is that those things are still there with older properties, be it a maisonette, be it sometimes a flat, and sometimes, or more often, every house at some stage is going to get some sort of garden. And so, yes, there is a huge demand at a younger age that only wants to be practical. I want to go in and I want the buzzer and I want all those things and I can do this and do that. But when it comes to moving to their next part of their life, be it that they're maybe going to settle down or they have a partner and they have children, then they go to what is called the older style properties, partly because of the space they offer, partly because they're more solid, and partly because they offer scope where possible to extend, potentially even if it's into the loft, for argument's sake, which the new properties are already maxed out. So if you've ever been on a modern estate, a modern development, you will find that you've got about a metre or just under a metre between you and your neighbour. And you've got a postage stamp garden at the back, and then there's another one back in onto that. So if you put a conservatory on it, you've lost your garden to a large extent because there isn't any other space. And so it's those things that make the older properties attractive. When it comes to renting the older properties, then that's down to the landlords now having to bring them up to a certain standard to make sure that they can actually get the better rent for them. Otherwise, they will definitely lose out to new modern properties where people are just, want easy life, trouble free. And of course, we are the United Kingdom. We are an island. We do not have space to grow outward as much as we'd like. Though we have it, we can't because there's all sorts of constraints and restrictions. So they're either going to go up or they're going to go down. And the reality is that there are lots and lots of towers that are being built. And sometimes those towers are not community friendly, to be perfectly honest with you, Paul. They become ghettos if people don't maintain them well. And then people want to get out of those to, guess what? An older property, so they only got one neighbor. So there's a whole bunch of things that actually come to that point. And so he's not taking that on board, really.
He makes another interesting point, actually. We're currently in the middle of a stamp duty holiday, and he said that the IMLA also point out that despite the raise in interest rates, mortgage affordability is likely to be back at levels seen in 2005-6, and buyers will not face higher mortgage repayments, and the burden will be compared to the historical average. So what he's saying is that eventually the market will have to find an affordability level. So even with higher interest rates, they're going to have to do something about the multiples or extend the term so that we get to a point where the mortgage payment is comfortable and affordable. So he says the actual challenge is how to get the deposit, because the affordability will sort itself out as the rate settles. But with the Help to Buy looking to go, and he said that deposit unlock scheme has been particularly popular, they're hoping that other schemes like that, and maybe even a reprieve late in the day for the Help to Buy, will mean that people get the chance to get that deposit saved, particularly if they don't have access to the bank of mum and dad, which of course not everybody has.
No, and access to bank of mum and dad is really should be available to across the board. In fact, I've recently had a conversation with a family who, for example, didn't even have the kids to go to, but were quite happy to refinance their property and provide a deposit for people on the basis that they will be part of that structure. So let's say, your son decides to buy a property, but you don't have the deposit, but somebody down the road says, well, they'll lend you that deposit. But what they're going to do is they become part of they take a second charge or a security on that. And so they want to be part of the growth of that property. So it's another way of an investment, a creative way of investment, but at the same time, a help that's come through. And it's quite interesting that somebody, is sitting at home thinking, well, how else can I make money? And then thinking, well, I've now come to a point where I'm not going to do anything. So let's say if I go and refinance this by 100 grand and gave £10,000 to 10 more people who are able to put this down as a deposit, and I then become part of 10 more properties. And when they sell, a bit like the Help to Buy scheme, when they sell, whatever happens, my family or my futures will actually end up benefiting from some interest that they may have earned and some capital growth depending on the value of the property. Quite interesting, really. But what I'm saying is there are people out there now, come up with more and more creative ideas of how this can continue to do. Now, they wouldn't do that, would they, if they didn't see a end goal and end result? And we know the end goal and end result. If you look back at the house price increases just in the last couple of years, last year alone was nearly 20%. So there is a temptation for people to think, well, I could be part of a scheme that could offer growth in the future, but at the same time offer youngsters a first step on the run of the ladder.
He's saying that it's very important that we have a high loan-to-value mortgage market, a thriving high loan-to-value LTV market. So he says that the numbers are improving in terms of products that are available for 95% or thereabouts. But he says that they're not anywhere back to the pre-September level. And of course, prices are much higher than back then. But he's saying that it looks like the market is going to fall back this year because there won't be as much lending as there was previously for various reasons, obviously, we've highlighted. But to the extent of how much it falls back will be a reflection on how creative and how imaginative and how brave the lending market's been.
Yeah, I mean, again, he's just going back in another way. But I've said that we need more products back up there at 95% or above in order for people to be motivated. Their cost of living and, of course, their affordabilities will come into account. But it means that they might have to move further out in order to get that first chance. And when you go a bit further out, from the south going towards north or east or west, there are lots and lots of opportunities, lots of scopes for people to step onto the first rung of the property ladder. And I think that is very, very key in how they are mortgaged and so forth. So yes, I mean lenders will, and I think they will once we've got this settlement from 4.5% or 5% or 4%, whatever that Bank of England rate is going to be, we will start to see a steadiness of the market. Because at this moment in time, the bit that throws everybody out is that, for example, the mortgage offers are only, offered for about 15 days or 16 days, because even the lenders are not sure how quick the mortgage rate is going to change. So, that was originally 3 months. You could turn around and say, for the next 3 months, here's your mortgage offer. You got an offer and you can go and trade that in for a property within the next 3 months. Well, that's down to 15 days. And it's almost an impossible task in 15 days. And the reason for that is because the uncertainty that we have in the mortgage market in the Bank of England's rate, we're not know. So in the next 10 days, give or take, we will know if it's going to be 4%. But then, people will still sit on their hands and think, well, he did say 4.5%. So when's that going to happen? And he did hint it might be more than 4.5%. So when's that going to happen? So until such time as we find stability in that is always going to be a bit volatile.
Indeed. Let's take a look at our final story this week, which is a really interesting one, and one that hadn't really dawned on me until I saw this report. We're talking about landlords over the last few months really finding it to be challenging in the marketplace. But there might be a niche area where they could flourish. And it's this, basically. Landlords need to adapt properties as the number of adapt properties rather, as the number of older tenants rise. So basically, the long-term tenants over 65, that number is surging. Half of the landlords say they are prepared to make changes to their property to accommodate the needs of older tenants, but this may come with a price tag at a time of rising costs in the sector. So this is analysis by Paragon Bank based on government data. It's revealed that the number of households in the private rented sector aged between 45 and 64 increased by 70% over the past 10 years, with those aged 65 and over increasing by 38%. So basically, I suppose this is due to the fact that people have spent pensions, people have spent those endowment policies and not paid off their mortgage. They've had to sell the property to pay off the debt, I guess, and now they're in the rented sector, something of that nature.
Yes, I mean, it's probably a little bit of an under the radar sector that's been going on in the background, and I'm not at least surprised at all as to where that is. And because it's a steady market, it's not a moving market in the sense that, first time buyers or youngsters are moving with jobs and all sorts of other things that create that. There is a steady market where people have actually ended up taking a long-term rental on a property due to a number of reasons, Paul. And some of them are the ones that you just highlighted, and some are probably just their own personal health circumstances, situations that have meant that they've had to come out of bigger houses and not be able to, and then not be at an age or time where they want to get involved in a new house. So they've either shared some of that money with their family, help the kids or the grandchildren, and then decided that, it's better for them to rent. There's a whole bunch of schemes out there where people have now been, taking monies out of their properties in terms of, long-term rental. And that's when they turn around and say, well, actually a lender will come along and say, we'll give you, I think it's called equity release. Actually, that was the word I was looking for, equity release. Yeah. They've taken those out, which they've used, enjoyed, and know full well that. So when they've taken out equity release, theoretically they become a tenant of their own property, and it's a long-term thing. So there is a hidden market that's been going on in the background through things like equity release, through things like people selling their bigger properties and coming and downsizing. And for certain landlords, they've had stability and continuity if they've turned around and adopted or adapted, as you would say, the properties for their liking, being perhaps from disability, being from old age, from all of those things that are there. So there is a huge growing market. Now that wasn't there, certainly in my younger days, that wasn't there because nobody ever wanted to leave the house that they actually bought, paid for and cleared. But there were things like the endowments, which people cashed in, which didn't do very well. There were situations where people had interest-only mortgages, and there wasn't enough equity in the property that could allow them to sell it, pay off the mortgage, and have enough perhaps to go and buy something else. So they then ended up to go and rent for long term and use the balance of the equity as a payment towards their rental life. So there's the whole different area that existed. But you're absolutely right. There is a market there, and there is a steady market and a good market, because you know that at a certain age, not necessarily at 35, but certainly 50, 55, 60 upwards, there is a steadiness there, isn't it? They're not interested in shuffling around. Also, it makes it twice as harder even to get a mortgage at those levels, primarily because of age against the time, and perhaps your income is not there at that time in order to justify the way they would work out those. So there is a huge growing market for the oldie goldies, as you might want to say, but they're good tenants to a large extent, because they're not shifting in a hurry.
The report highlights, in fact, it's got a very specific name. I think it's the middle-aged tenant. I've lost this. Oh, there we are. The report is very politically correct, called the middle-aged tenant surge, which I thought was amusing.
I just call it the oldie goldies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a bit more realistic. The research showed that 21% would invest up to £1,000 in their property. 5% would go as far as £5,000. But it's saying there's now some distinct tenant groups. There's obviously students, who are going to be a renting or a tenant group, young couples, and then, of course, this surging group of older tenants who, and each of those groups have their own specific requirements. And the over 65 specifically, as that's what we're talking about here, more likely to live alone and in smaller homes, for example, and the sector will need to adapt, to evolve, to cater for these people. And the advantage are, of course, is that they tend to prefer longer tenancies. They're more respectful of the neighbours and the community, and of course they're reliable payers.
Yes, and of course, for many years, people like McCarthy Stone and other operators like that have been offering facilities just like that for the over 55s and the over 60s, knowing full well that that's what they're going to get. Either they get a portion of it, a bit like a share of the equity, or they turn around and buy it at a lower price, because obviously they're subsidized by the government to house older people into these properties on the basis that they are releasing old stock that, perhaps one person has been sitting in a 5-bedroom house, which may potentially offer the land and the space to convert into 20 houses, for example, 20 flats, so they want to encourage them, obviously, to do that. Also, some of those schemes, like the people like McCarthy and Stone, they will turn around and offer help. So they have somebody on site for the elderly, where assistance can be given. Someone that's got a call out. So there's a whole market there that's been going for some time. But it's interesting that it's now becoming a little bit more of a highlight. But there are lots and lots of schemes for anyone that's listening out there. Lots of schemes with some people like McCarthy, so other developers like so, who offer you specific, and you actually can be buying them a lot cheaper than normally, because they are governed by the age factor that you can do. And so, October this year, I qualified for my. I haven't got my bus pass yet, but I've got my. I get Saga and all the other bits and pieces. So you got to utilize the discounts for the oldie goldie sector. So I've fallen into that sector now, so I could probably go and buy myself a cheap flat to go and live in my passing days, which will probably be still in an area. For example, I looked at one only this week for a client, which is just on the outskirts of Surrey, a very nice 1-bedroom ground floor flat, which is part of a scheme as such, only can be sold to people over the age of 60. But it's a 1-bedroom property, and it gives somebody a base to work on. But shockingly, probably going to be somewhere between 100 and 150,000 pounds. And that's pretty good, isn't it? When you think that you can't even get a studio place under normal circumstances. So sometimes it's not bad to be old. It can pay.
To me, it seems like a really interesting business model for a prospective landlord in terms of going into a sector, because at the end of the day, very often you inherit a property that was maybe that of a parent, and that may well have already been adapted and have all the wider corridors and all that kind of thing in it for that very use. So you often find yourself inheriting that kind of property in real life as a starting point, let's just say. And then there are a lot of those sort of properties that come into probate sales, of course, which may even be in an auction, in which case you might get a good, valuable price. You've then got, of course, a reliable tenant base. You're not going to have the churn and therefore the voids. It does seem like a very sensible area of the tenant market to go in if you're going to be a landlord.
Yeah, and there are schemes. I think Guy Charison runs an operative scenario about the properties that you can buy that are freehold with life tenancy. I think they're called life tenancy actually. And basically those are bought for the fraction, but obviously with longevity, because if somebody is elderly that's in those properties for another 15, 20 years, but you've only paid, I don't know, £150,000 for a bungalow in, Southend-on-Sea or something like that, where somebody elderly has been there for some time, then, yes, if you're a younger person and you invest in that in the next 20 years, 30 years, obviously, life expectancy says to you that that person is probably not going to last much more than 100 years or maybe a bit more. There are very few. I mean, we can count probably on our hands of late how many over 100 have actually are surviving, but a good percentage of them are not going to be there. So that's your gamble, if you like. That's the challenge. That do I buy a property that's got a life tenancy and somebody in there is maybe at 75, 85, 95, and how long am I going to be investing before that property then I can be sold onto the market and I can make money? So there's loads of schemes like that, Paul, out there. It's just they're not been highlighted. And I think now people are realizing that even through the current crisis that we've had, and that people are borrowing and the cost of living has gone up. Sometimes people sort of say, okay, I'm going to sell up, get out and go and get myself a small place where I can, just enjoy. I don't want to have the hassle of this all the time. This uncertainty about bills and so forth. I can have to, and some of them are all incorporated. So it's a one payment, and so all your electric, your gas, whatever is all part of the whole structure. So they're worth looking at. There's no doubt about it, and I think there is definitely room for a market there.
Yeah, interesting story. I found that one particularly. I think food for thought for landlords looking to find their niche in 2023. And on that bombshell, Joe, that's all we've got time for this week. Another 45 minutes has gone past on Property Matters. We'll see you again, same time next week.